Remember when Trump promised he'd win the trade war with China? That America held all the cards? What if I told you China's been holding the ultimate trump card all along, and they just played it? Right now, auto plants across America and Europe are shutting down, not because of labor strikes, not because of chip shortages, but because China controls 90% of the materials so critical that without them, your $60,000 Tesla is just an expensive paperweight. They're called rare earth elements, and China just turned off the tap. This isn't just another trade dispute. This is China revealing the ultimate weakness in America's industrial strategy and proving that Trump never had the winning hand he claimed.
Trump says he's tough on China, but when pressure hits, he folds, he chickens out. Because here's the truth, he doesn't have the power. China does. Today, U.S. car makers are panicking. General Motors, Toyota, Hyundai, they're warning the White House that factories might shut down, not just slow down, shut down, because China is holding back rare earth magnets, these tiny parts that power brakes, steering, sensors in every modern vehicle, and China controls over 90% of them. Without Chinese exports, cars don't get built. People lose their jobs, and Trump can't do a thing to stop it. Trump's whole image is built on domination, power, getting what he wants. But China dominates here. China has the power. China will get what it wants. China restricted exports, and that made Trump crawl to Geneva and nicely ask for help. But Trump attacked China, unprovoked. Trump started a trade war with a strong country and a much smarter leader. Factories across the globe are slowing down, and China's not blinking because China knows Trump always chickens out. China is in control here. They hold the resources. They hold the leverage. And Trump's big mouth can't change that. When China held back the parts, Trump ran to Truth Social screaming, China broke the agreement. But even his own trade reps admit rare earths weren't part of the deal. Trump either lied, again, or didn't know what was going on in his own agreement, again. And now America's supply chain is hanging by a thread. And we know what will happen. Taco. Trump always chickens out. China will win, and sadly, the American people will suffer because of Trump. Again.
So what exactly are these rare earth elements everyone's suddenly talking about? We're talking about 17 metallic elements with names like neodymium and dysprosium. You can't pronounce them, but you can't live without them. They're in your smartphone, your headphones, your electric car, and even in the F-35 fighter jet. A typical electric vehicle contains just 550 grams, about a pound of rare earth elements. But without them, the motors don't work, period. And here's the thing. China controls 69% of global mining and 90% of processing for these critical materials. That's not just market dominance. That's a monopoly that would make John D. Rockefeller blush. How did this happen? While America was focused on quarterly profits, China played the long game. They invested heavily in rare earth mining and processing since the 1990s. By 2002, they had effectively priced America's Mountain Pass mine, once the world's leading producer, out of business. Western companies always chasing cheaper supplies happily shifted their sourcing to China. And China has used this leverage before. In 2010, during a territorial dispute with Japan, they briefly halted rare earth exports. The message was clear: cross us, and we can shut down your high-tech industries overnight.
This phone, my phone, has something so small but so important. But China is starting to restrict some of its export to the U.S. They're called rare earths, and they're in almost all forms of modern technology. I'm at an electronics center in Hong Kong to have this iPhone taken apart. Rare earths are in the microphone. They're in the motor that makes it vibrate. Rare earths are a group of 17 elements, mostly found across the world, but they're costly to extract and process. And they aren't just in phones. They're also in other machines like routers and printers. But what does China have to do with this? Well, according to the IEA, China controls more than 90% of the global refined output of these elements. And Beijing appears to have taken advantage of this. On April 4th, the Chinese government placed export restrictions on 7 types of rare earths as part of its retaliation against President Donald Trump's tariffs on Chinese goods.
They're weaponizing it in a trade war, is what is happening. We're using tariffs, they are using minerals.
Trump has ordered a probe to evaluate the U.S.'s own supply chain, but it will probably take years for the U.S. to catch up with China's rare earth monopoly.
When Trump launched his trade war in 2018, he famously tweeted that trade wars are good and easy to win. His logic seemed simple. America buys more from China than China buys from America, so China has more to lose, right? But that calculation overlooked something crucial: the asymmetry of dependence. Yes, China depends on American consumers buying their products, but America depends on China for the critical materials that make those products possible in the first place. Trump's tariff strategy was like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except China's weapon of choice was a periodic table element you probably can't even pronounce. When Trump returned to office in January of 2025, he wasted no time reigniting the trade war. On February 1st, he imposed a 10% blanket tariff on all Chinese imports. Within weeks, that tariff was doubled to 20%. Then came Liberation Day on April 2nd. Trump's sweeping tariffs overhaul with a universal 10% tariff on all U.S. imports and country-specific surcharges. China was hit hardest, with a 34% tariff on top of existing duties. China's response? On April 4th, they announced 34% tariffs on U.S. goods. But the real power move was imposing export controls on 7 critical rare earth elements. And here's where the irony gets delicious. China cited overcapacity as their reason for restricting rare earth exports. That's like the only person selling water in a desert saying they're limiting sales because people are drinking too much. How considerate. When the West complains about Chinese overcapacity in steel or solar panels, it's called fair trade. When China limits rare earth exports citing overcapacity, suddenly it's an economic weapon. Funny how that works, isn't it? The impact was immediate and devastating. By early June, European auto supplier plants were shutting down. U.S. auto executives warned that production could be cut back within weeks. With a deeply intertwined global supply chain, China's export restrictions are already shutting down production in Europe's supplier sector, said Benjamin Krieger, Secretary General of the European Association of Automotive Suppliers. The problem is particularly acute for electric vehicles and hybrids, which use significantly more rare earth elements than conventional cars. This couldn't come at a worse time for Western automakers betting big on the EV transition. Auto executives are scrambling to find alternative suppliers, but the options are limited. China's dominance in rare earth processing is so complete that even materials mined elsewhere typically end up being processed in China.
We need rare earth metals to make chips. And China owns about 95% of the world's rare earth metals. So the U.S. actually, to produce these high-end chips that it's now embargoing to go to China, is dependent on importing all these rare earth metals from China. Imagine China would say, sorry, we won't sell these rare earth metals to the U.S. All of a sudden, the U.S. would be in big trouble. So I do think it's really admirable that China has now focused so much on having an open environment that they have not actually sanctioned these rare earth metals.
For decades, the West has restricted China's access to advanced semiconductor technology. Now China is restricting access to the materials needed to build the machines that make those semiconductors. It's economic karma at its finest. After years of being on the receiving end of export controls, China's finally serving the West a taste of its own bitter medicine. And it's a pill that's particularly hard to swallow when your electric car won't start. The student has become the master. After decades of Western technology restrictions, China has learned that sometimes the best defense is a good offense, especially when you control 90% of the world's critical mineral processing. What makes China's approach particularly effective is that it targets a vulnerability the West created for itself. By outsourcing critical supply chains in pursuit of lower cost, Western countries essentially handed China this leverage voluntarily.
Breaking news, the auto industry may have to shut down in the next several weeks because of Donald Trump's tariffs. The reason is rare earth magnets. 90% of the rare earth magnets in the world all come from China. And you say, why do we need these magnets? Well, we need magnets because these magnets go into transmissions, they go into alternators, they go into sensors, they go into motors, they go into your lights, they go into power and steering systems, and many other important aspects of the mechanical parts of the car. They're greatly needed. It's so important and so scary that Ford, GM, and Volkswagen have all stressed to President Trump why this needs to be resolved. Now, this issue has not gotten much notice in the press, but I'm just educating you about it. I know most of you all, especially MAGA, do not understand how we are tied to the rest of the world. Many parts, many minerals, many things that we need, and we are tied to the rest of the world. It is not all found in the United States. It is not all found in America, and we can't get it here.
The harsh reality. Developing a complete rare earth supply chain outside of China will take years, if not decades. The US has reopened the Mountain Pass mine in California, but mining is just the first step. Processing is where China truly dominates. The Geneva Truce in May provided temporary relief, with China agreeing to suspend its rare earth export controls. But the vulnerability has been exposed, and China has demonstrated it's willing and able to use its rare earth dominance as a strategic weapon. So what's the lesson in all of this? In the high-stakes poker game of global trade, China has been playing the long game while Trump focused on the next hand. Trump's strategy was based on a fundamental misreading of the cards. Yes, America buys more from China than China buys from America, but China controls the critical materials that make modern technology possible. The next time someone tells you America holds all the cards in the trade war with China, ask them if they know what neodymium is, and watch their face as they realize they don't have a clue about the elements that power their modern life. In this high-stakes game of global trade, it turns out China has been holding the rare earth card all along. And that's a hand that Trump can't beat. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.